All right, well, we are going to spend the rest of summer looking at stories. Story time with Jesus. Jesus told a whole lot of stories. Some of those are really short, like that one. That was, super short story, right? The longest Bible reading you've ever had to do, right? Some of them are really super short. Some of them are a bit longer, and some of them, come with a long explanation. So there's quite a variety. But Jesus clearly spent a lot of his ministry teaching through stories. And these stories, some of these stories, they make our hearts to sing. There's something so powerful and rich in them that we are opened up to new realities, new things. And that is amazing and wonderful. And some of these stories, they have a bit of a sting to them. There's a bit of a twist, and they go, ooh, that kind of hurts, or it kind of shifts and changes us a little bit. Well, this one has both. This little story, very short story, sings and it stings at the same time. And parables are really stories just about everyday life. So Jesus, took farming analogies and household analogies. And this one is looking at the financial world. And we see here that some things aren't very new, are they? Money lending is not new. Money lending has been going on for thousands of years. Is very old and still going strong these days, though. So there's something about this that we don't quite understand. It's a little bit hard for us to understand because there are some differences. Where do we normally borrow money from? If you're going to get a home loan, who do you go and talk to? The bank. Yeah, like an institution, like a group. And it's heavily regulated. You sign these really long contracts, and there's clear, going in and coming out for how this is going to happen. I mean, some of you might be going to the bank of mum and dad. Does that still happen? The bank of mum and dad, or the bank of grandma and grandpa? So sometimes we borrow money from individuals, but most of the time our lending comes from institutions. And I suppose it's a little bit topical these days, because could you imagine, interest rates going up, and you've borrowed to your capacity, and cost of living is going up, and we're already finding that there are quite a few people who are struggling to pay off their home loans. This is going to be a common thing and a growing experience for more and more Australians, that they're not able to pay off their debt that they've committed to. They've found themselves in a financial pickle. So not being able to pay off a debt is not a new thing. That's been going on for thousands of years. But here in Australia, if you can't pay off a debt, what happens? Well, the person or the bank loaning you the money, well, they'll find ways to recoup the money themselves. They're not really going to be at a loss. And the person who can't pay off the debt, what's going to happen to them? Worst case scenario, they'll declare bankruptcy, that they can't pay it off. But did you notice in the kids' talk, when Jess was teaching us in that little example, there's something about that. That was funny. There's something about that for many, many people. One estimate puts it at 8 million people. There are potentially 8 million people in the world right now where that little scenario is actually their life. They can't declare bankruptcy. And so what happens is they're in a debt to a moneylender, and they now control their life. They're enslaved. It is the most common form of slavery in our modern day world. That when you can't pay back a debt, you've got forced labor. You must work for these people, and there are no clear outcomes or how long that's going to be or how much, your labor hours are worth. 8 million people, potentially, right now, are stuck. They cannot get out of the debt that they are bonded to. Sadly, that is also not something that is new. That has been going on for thousands of years. And it would have been ringing in the minds of the people who first heard this parable. When Jesus told this parable about two people who'd, borrowed money and couldn't pay it back, what they would have been thinking and hearing is these people might find themselves in slavery. Their lives might be forever changed by this scenario. And it's hard for us to imagine some of the emotional experience of this story. I was trying to think what might relate here, and I was trying to think, imagine if you were a person in that scenario with a home loan. You borrowed to your capacity, you'd pushed your limits, and you were struggling to pay it off, and then interest rates start going up before you were told. And now that's not happening. Maybe you've even lost your job. You're not able to pay back the home loan debt. Imagine calling the bank. You press 1, then you press 5, then you press 1 again, and then you have to try all over again. You press 1, and finally you get to talk to some real human being on the other end. Imagine talking to them, explaining a situation. I cannot pay my mortgage. I cannot make the repayments, and you've already used the interest-only payments or whatever it is. Like there is no other option, and you explain the situation. I cannot pay this debt. I'm at a loss. I'm stuck. I don't know what to do. Imagine the bank replying. Imagine the person saying, "No worries. We'll cancel it. The house is yours." Could you, I can't actually imagine that because it wouldn't happen. But imagine the joy, right? Imagine that experience of going from, I'm financially ruined. I cannot pay. I'm going to lose my house. My family are going to have to move. The joy of being here, that's gone. This is devastating. I don't know what life is going to look like. I don't know how I'm going to retire. I don't know how life is going to pan out. Imagine going from that to you now own the house outright. Like the joy, you'd be ecstatic. You would tell everyone which bank that was. Like you would share that news. It would be the most wonderful celebration. You would have a party, maybe a week-long party. You'd be celebrating that amazing gift. That's what we're supposed to feel with the kingdom of heaven. That is like a tiny little snippet, like a taste of the joy of forgiveness that we are given in God's kingdom. We have each been shackled. We are indebted. We don't stack up. We can't pay off the heavenly home. We can try and we can try and we can try, but we can never make the interest. We can never make the repayments. We can't do anything. We can't do enough. We are not perfect enough to earn our way into a heavenly home, into being a part of God's family. That debt, that payment is too big for us. Heaven is too amazing. I can't just rock up to heaven. If I rock up to heaven, I've ruined it for everyone because I'm not perfect. It's no longer heaven if I'm there. I just can't try hard enough to get there. I am shackled. We are each shackled. And yet Jesus cancels the debt. It's gone. You don't have to pay it. The heavenly home is yours outright. You're in. That's amazing. What a gift. What amazing grace. And so that's the sing in the story. That is where the story sings. Because the context of this story, so it's a very short little parable, but it sits within a longer narrative. And the longer narrative, if you go and have a look in your Bible, is that Jesus has gone to a man's house. The man's name is Simon. And there's a woman there who's called a sinful woman. She has been shamed and shunned by her community. She owes a debt to her community, and there's nothing that she can do that will get her back into a good standing in the community. She's shackled. And yet what Jesus does is receives her. She is so full of joy for what she gets. She is so full of joy. She takes an expensive jar of perfume and wastes it on Jesus. And then she's so full of joy, she has tears of joy coming out of her eyes, and they fall on Jesus' feet, and then she cleans his feet with her hair. She is abundant with joy. She's overwhelmed with joy. She is celebrating and honoring Jesus, the one who has given her forgiveness. That is the amazing part of this parable. So how does this parable then sting? Well, there are two people in that parable who have borrowed money and they can't pay it back. One is a reference to that sinful woman, the one who owed more, and the other one is a reference to Simon, who is the host. And so this story is a little bit of a sting for Simon. And it's then a warning for us. Because what does Simon do? Simon is shocked that he's got this party crasher, this shameful woman has come in and stolen the show at his party. He doesn't want her there. And he's like, Jesus, do you not even know who this woman is? If you were a prophet, you would know this stuff. Jesus, holiness, get it together. It needs to be right. She can't be a part of this. So this story stings because Simon sees himself as not needing forgiveness, as not needing grace. Simon sees himself as he's earned his place in the kingdom. He's standing on his own 2 feet, and he doesn't recognize his need for grace. So this is probably the biggest warning for many of us who have been a Christian for a while. If you've hung out in church for some time, this is the biggest warning for us. If you've never heard this before, then hear the wonderful grace and forgiveness of God for everyone. Someone who's been shamed from society, someone who's been pushed out, who feels like they don't belong and can't fit in, they are welcomed in by God. Jesus says, come, all who are thirsty, come to the living water and receive life. The danger is for us who've been a Christian for some time is that we can start to fall into, well, I'm doing all the right things, and so I get to keep being a part of this, and I've set up my social standing within this church community, and people think of me in a certain way because of how I act and what I can uphold and prove myself. There's a subtle danger, and it happens over time, and that's what makes it so dangerous. It's because it creeps in over time. And the warning is, don't forget. So firstly, have you received? Have you always been functioning on your own righteousness, on your own effort? Have you never received? So have you received the grace and forgiveness of God that puts us all on an equal standing? And then the question of, have you forgotten? Because as soon as we forget, as soon as we think it's our own righteousness, that's when we start pushing other people away. We start setting up obstacles and barriers for other people. I've got it all together, but you kind of need to do some of these other things before you ever get to be a part of us. never forget that we all rely on the grace and the mercy of God. A little question to finish with is, does this mean some people get more forgiveness than others? You know, there's one had 50 debt and one had 5 debt. Are some sins worse than others? You know, the sinful woman, she's racked up a debt of 50, but Simon, he's doing pretty well. It's only a little bit of a debt. How does this work? Well, I think objectively, the price that has been paid for forgiveness for everyone is Jesus' death on the cross. Objectively, the cost has been the same for all of us. But subjectively, the way we experience it, and this is what Jesus is trying to point out, that Simon is not quite getting it subjectively, but the sinful woman really does get it from her experience. We can fall into the trap of a skewed perspective about where we stand. So may you know just how wonderful God's grace is. May you know the wonderful forgiveness that has been brought into your life, that you have been welcomed in, that the heavenly home is yours. There is no mortgage you have to pay. You are there forever for your soul to rest with the Lord. Amen. Well, let's finish our time together with singing of God's wonderful goodness and blessing each other.